the News Channel 5 network, this is MorningLine with Nick Beres.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on MorningLine. Nick Beres here on a Tuesday. It's good to be back, live and direct. My thanks to Matthew Torres and Chris Conti for filling in for me while I was gone for a period of time. But back now for the foreseeable future, and this is a live program. We're going to open up the phone lines. You're welcome to join in the conversation. It is good to be back with you, and hope if you had a long holiday weekend, you're doing well. But an important topic to kick things off. The month of January is National Slavery and Human Trafficking Prevention Month, okay? There are a lot of months dedicated to various causes. This is a very important one. If you've been following the news, especially here in Tennessee of late, I think all of us in the news business have done stories on the issue of human trafficking and slavery, believe it or not. And for many of us, it may be, wait, that's still going on? Oh yeah, it's a major problem, and I suspect perhaps worse than you think. And it's not just something you see in the movies. I mean, it really does happen. It's an awful, awful thing. And the idea of preventing it is educating and getting the word out. Red flags, all of that. And that's part of what we're going to talk about today. And you're welcome to join in the conversation this morning, 615-737-7587, as always. But to talk about it with us this morning, representative from the state with the Reproductive and Women's Health Program, Kelly Luskin. Good morning to you, ma'am.
Good morning.
Thank you for coming on. And, we have done a lot of stories on this. And I was telling her before the show that it's still, even for someone like me in the news business, it's hard to believe the scope of the problem. I mean, you hear the word slavery and you hear human trafficking, and the definition of it, maybe for some it's a little foggy. I thought that's where we could start, if you would. So, slavery and human trafficking, that's an umbrella term. What fits underneath that? I don't know if it's separate or together, but slavery and human trafficking, how would you describe it?
So it can be either sex trafficking or labor trafficking. A lot of times people forget about the labor trafficking piece, but it's where an individual is being either through force, fraud, or coercion, being used for profitability for someone else. Okay, that's a good, straightforward definition. Now, you would imagine in this country, no one's going to willingly volunteer for that. So, of course, they're being. Can you give me a scenario of, and we've profiled some, where I imagine whether you want to use a labor or a sex trade example. So it could be someone's neighbor, a young woman who just suddenly disappears, kidnapped by someone who targets them. They vanish. Okay, there's a missing person alert, maybe an Amber Alert eventually sent out depending on the age of the individual. And they vanish, and what happens to them? They lose their control and their freedom, as we talked about, and usually these are vulnerable individuals that are picked up into this. So
these may be individuals that are already perhaps dealing with issues themselves, mental health issues. Maybe they're homeless, maybe they're living on the streets, maybe they're out on their own prostituting themselves on the streets, and then they become targets for these individuals that see them and go after them. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So they made folks already off the radar. I guess the example I used is maybe more rare. I can't imagine, I have a neighbor with a daughter, and if she suddenly disappeared, it would be a big story, and I'd be like, what the heck? But I mean, she's in a situation where she's with a loved family and is watched closely, and I just don't, to me, I don't see that happening that often.
Yeah. And it does happen. That is
but it can
more
happen.
Rare. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And it can happen right in our backyard, just as you said.
Are there people driving around trolling for them?
Yes. And
literally.
I think one of the big things that really woke me up to this issue is when I heard a judge talking about this issue and talking about juveniles, like runaway juveniles particularly, that there are people really out there looking for these individuals that are looking for something else.
Right.
And oftentimes they're looking for love, for somebody to come in and fill a void in their life. And so a lot of times that's how people get pulled into it.
They mislead them initially, and before you know it, they're caught into this and they have nowhere else to turn.
Right.
Just horrible. Is it mostly younger people as opposed to older? What's the demographic?
It is more younger. I think the average age is 13. that people get into the human trafficking.
Male and female?
Male and female.
Predominantly one more than the other?
Predominantly female.
Would that be more for the sex trade, or does that apply as well for when we're talking about maybe folks being grabbed for hard labor?
You know, I'm not sure about for labor, definitely for sex trade for sure. I would imagine with labor it's a little bit more balanced, of course depending on what the labor is. If it's manual labor or housekeeping or
how would that work with labor? Now, I understand, like, you know, the sex trade we can get into, but labor, all right, so let's say there's someone on the street and they're misled by someone who then gets their clutches into them, and then they would, in this country, would they leave the country with them, or would they be here in the country and be using them in what way as a slave for work?
Yes, here in this country.
Okay, so...
And all sorts of different industries, you know, like I said, in housekeeping type of industry, in building and commercial construction, and in agricultural. Meaning,
so they would be grabbed. I'm just trying to get into the nitty-gritty here so I really understand. All right, so for labor then, if it was construction or housekeeping, there'd be some scumbag, and that's exactly what they are, anyone who does this, who gets hold of some of these individuals and then starts farming them out and say, well, today you're going to be going to this house and cleaning this house, and then we're going to pick you up afterwards, and we're going to have the money, and then you're going to come back, and where do they keep them? And the people are too afraid to run when they get dropped off at a house?
Yeah, they're under high control. They may actually, you know, I've heard of situations where they actually get them addicted to drugs.
Okay.
So sometimes in situations where they don't even realize that they want to leave. And that can be hard too as a provider with these clients. If you come in and you see them in our health departments, that they may not want to report. So that's an interesting flip side on it as well.
Okay, so as we sit here today, right now, Middle Tennessee, in Nashville, you think there's someone that's in slavery being brought out somewhere and working somewhere as we speak?
Oh, absolutely.
No doubt about it. I know for a fact there is with the sex trade, people being prostituted out, right? Yeah. But there's just no, in Nashville. All right, well, okay, and I guess the key on this is educating good folks like you and myself to look for the red flags. I mean, I can just imagine if I caught wind of something like this, and I'm sure there's some unsavory characters that are the ones behind this. They want to protect whatever they call their investment, but what are the flags you look for, and then what do you do?
So some big red flags to look for are people that are maybe overly anxious, may not feel like they have a voice for themselves, may have a lot of inconsistent stories, may not even be aware of where they are, because a lot of times these people are moving around all over the place.
One city
very
to
quickly.
another. Oh, quickly, it's just shuttled.
Yeah. And so a lot of times they won't even know where they are, not really aware of what time it is. Trying to think other big things.
So like a commodity being moved around. So like for instance, let's just say I were to hire someone through an ad to do some landscaping work for me, okay? And then, you know me, I can't shut up. So I'm gonna be out there, you want a bottle of water, what are you up to? And I'll pick up on it if I think someone's strange. And there's a lot of strange people, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if I'm out there talking to someone and they're like, well, now, where am I? You know, like I say, well, what do you think about Julie? Oh, where are we? Or something like, all right, so if I suspect something like that, and still, I could be wrong. Maybe this guy's just clueless. I don't know. And they don't know. And then maybe I get the sense that they're very, you know, nervous, and maybe someone over there watching them. What do I do?
So there's a 1-800 number. Actually, Tennessee has a 1-800.
But I don't want them to leave right then. I don't want this guy to leave.
Yeah.
I want someone to get out there immediately. Should I just call 911 and say, look, I think there's someone here. Should I call my police department in Mount Juliet and say, I think we have someone at my house right now working that is being forced to work. And there's some dude over there in a car that I think has a gun that's keeping an eye on everything while he's doing yard work for me. Should I just call 911? I don't want them to leave. I'm not afraid to go, you know, and call this guy out, but if he has a gun, I want someone to come. Yeah,
you definitely want to be aware of your own safety for sure, but still, I would still call the 1-800 number, the hotline, because they can put you in touch with the police force very quickly.
Okay, and there's the number on the screen. It's 855-558-6484. And so at that point, then maybe you get a response to the, so you think there are people right now employing individuals that maybe aren't aware of the fact that they're they see them every day maybe, and they don't know it.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of stuff where I've done that, and where I can't think of one where I was suspicious, but I don't know if I would have thought of that. Is that what you're trying to get people to do, to be?
Yeah, and there's actually Tennessee, Second Life Tennessee is doing this big awareness campaign called Eyes Up, and where they're really just trying to promote people's awareness, like raising your eyes to it and recognizing it and being willing to report it.
Yeah.
Because that's the, I mean, I think that's the big issue, is that people aren't aware. They're not suspicious of this.
Well, and some people, as many stories as we've done, I've asked you some very basic questions where I wanted to go behind it. I've seen the stories, she's in sex slavery, or she was a slave, or she was a human trafficking. And you see those terms, but I wanted to understand behind it tangibly how it really does work. Aside from just the standard, okay, there's a pimp prostituting out a woman against her will, which is the most standard thing that I've heard about. But, you know, the basics of it, and you're exactly right. You need to be aware of it and then report it. And you get the sense there's some hesitancy from people to report it if they pick up on some of these signals?
I'm sure there are. I think maybe even not so much hesitancy of just not being aware of what they're seeing in front of them. You know, just...
Or confused maybe, or not knowing what that might mean. Again, like I say, someone who acts a little strange or isn't totally aware, I mean, that doesn't mean they're
there could be
in a bad situation. There can be all kinds. So would you say err on the side of caution?
I would say, and that's why I'd say start with the hotline, because I think they can really help you assess the situation better.
Assess it. Yeah, maybe if you don't want to address it right there at that moment, you know you'll be seeing them again, call the hotline, describe what you see, and then if they think that's right, then you say, well, you know what, they're coming back again next week. And then maybe you have someone there waiting for them. Yeah, again, you hit some good red flags, but yeah, someone who's not free to leave or come as they go and wish. Maybe they're unpaid or not making much money, works excessively long hours or unusual hours, like weird hours that you wouldn't expect someone, not allowed to take breaks, seems fearful, anxious, or depressed, not too many possessions, lack control of their money, is not allowed to speak for him or herself. Yeah, inconsistencies in stories, like you say, when you start talking to them. Yeah. All good stuff. Listen, we'll take a break. When we come back, we're going to take some phone calls. If you have questions or comments about that, and we already have some coming in. More we want to talk about, as well as the Red Sand Project as well. So we'll get into more on this very important topic and just get the basic understanding and the word out on how maybe you can make a difference. We'll be back right after this.